The chamber was the largest structure ever built by any living species. It floated in the cold black space around a dying star, a ring of metal and glass wide enough to hold a small moon inside it. 4,312 species sent their representatives here. They called it the Grand Conclave, and for 600,000 years it had been the place where the galaxy made its decisions. Today, it was going to make a decision about Earth. Ambassador Emeka Ose sat in humanity's seat, a small chair near the back of the chamber, far from the elevated platforms where the elder species sat in their ancient thrones. He was a tall man with dark skin and calm eyes, and he had not spoken in 3 days. He did not need to. He already knew what was coming. The trial had lasted 4 months, 4 months of speeches and accusations and carefully worded documents that all said the same thing. Humanity was dangerous. Not because of weapons. Not because of war. Humanity was dangerous because of its ideas. The Dren speaker, an ancient creature that looked like a tree made of white bone, stood at the center of the chamber and read from the formal charges. Cultural contamination, ideological destabilization, unregulated mimetic influence. These were the crimes. In simple words, they meant that humanity had been talking to other species, and those species had started thinking new thoughts. Thoughts about freedom. Thoughts about fairness. Thoughts about the right to say no to those who were stronger. This terrified the elder species. The Dren had ruled their corner of the galaxy for 2 million years. The Torvan hegemony had absorbed and controlled 46 species under their authority. The Keth Collective had built an economy where younger species could never own their own technology. They had to rent it, forever dependent, forever grateful. These were the powers that had built the Galactic Accord, and they had built it to keep things exactly the way they were. Then humanity had arrived, 74 years ago, loud and curious and completely unaware of how things worked. Within a single generation, human teachers were on a dozen worlds. Human music played in alien cities. Human books were translated into languages that had no word for revolution until humans gave them one. The younger species, the ones who had been controlled for centuries, began to ask questions. Why did the elder species make all the decisions? Why can we not develop our own technology? Why must we obey simply because they are older? The elder species did not like these questions, and so they brought humanity to trial. Speaker after speaker rose to condemn Earth. The Torvan ambassador, a massive creature covered in dark plates of natural armor, called humanity a disease. The Keth representative, who spoke through a machine because its true voice would shatter glass, called human ideas a weapon more dangerous than any bomb. Even some neutral species voted against Earth, not because they hated humans, but because they feared what would happen if the elder species turned their anger on them instead. Ambassador Ose listened to all of it. He sat still and breathed slowly and watched 4,000 species decide that his people did not belong among them. When it was finally his turn to speak, the chamber went quiet, not out of respect, out of curiosity. They wanted to see if he would beg. He did not beg. He stood slowly, adjusted the simple dark suit he wore, and looked out across the chamber. Thousands of eyes and sensors and receptors of every kind looked back at him. You have spent 4 months telling this chamber that humanity is dangerous, he said. His voice was calm and even. You have said our ideas spread too fast, that our culture is too loud, that we make other species want things they should not want. He paused and looked directly at the Torvan ambassador. You are right. A murmur rippled through the chamber. He was not supposed to agree with them. Our ideas are dangerous, Ose continued. They are dangerous to anyone who believes that power should be permanent, that obedience should be automatic, that the strong have the right to silence the weak simply because they can. He let the words settle. You have the right to vote us out. Every species here has that right, under the Accord's own laws, and we will respect the result. We will leave peacefully. We will not fight. We will not threaten. He picked up the small case that held his files and documents. He closed it with a quiet click that somehow echoed in the enormous chamber. "But you should know something," he said, and now he looked directly into the recording array, the device that would broadcast his words to every corner of the galaxy. "Exile does not mean what you think it means, not for us." He stepped down from the platform and walked toward the exit. 4,000 species watched him go, and not one of them said a word. The vote was held 1 hour later. 3,894 species voted to exile Earth. 418 voted against. The resolution passed by an overwhelming majority. All trade routes to the Sol system were severed. All treaties were cancelled. All diplomatic protections were removed. A grid of quarantine beacons would be placed around humanity's star. A galactic warning sign that said, in every known language, "Do not contact." The elder species celebrated. The Torvan ambassador hosted a gathering where he told anyone who would listen that humanity would collapse within a generation. Every exiled species in history had. Without access to galactic trade, without the Accord's technology, without allies or support, Earth would slowly fall apart. In 50 years, humans would be a memory, a cautionary tale told to younger species who thought too much about freedom. Back on Earth, the news arrived at the speed of light. It was received in a small room in Geneva by a woman named Director Adeze Mwangi, who read the full resolution twice, set it down on her desk, and called an emergency session of the United Earth Council. There was no panic. There were no angry speeches. The council met, discussed, and voted. The vote was unanimous. They called it Directive Zero. Its contents were classified at the highest level. Only 12 people on Earth knew what it said. But in the weeks that followed, factories that had been idle began to run again. Scientists who had been working on small projects were reassigned to enormous ones. Military vessels that had been sitting in orbital docks were pulled in for redesign. Earth did not cry. Earth did not beg for the galaxy to take it back. Earth got to work. The galaxy expected Earth to go quiet. And it did, but not in the way anyone imagined. In the first year of exile, the quarantine beacons were placed around the Sol system. 160 automated stations, each one broadcasting the same message in 4,000 languages. This system is under isolation. Do not approach. Do not communicate. By order of the Galactic Accord. The elder species watched their sensors for signs of distress. They expected food shortages, energy failures, social collapse. They had seen it happen before, dozens of times, to dozens of species. Exile was a death sentence, wrapped in polite language, and everyone knew it. But the signals never came. What the galaxy did not understand, what they had never bothered to learn, was that humanity had spent its entire history surviving things that should have killed it. Ice ages, plagues, wars that burned entire continents. Humanity did not know how to give up, because giving up had never been an option. It was not in the blood. It was not in the bones. Director Mwangi stood before the United Earth Council on the first anniversary of exile and laid out the full scope of Directive Zero. It was, in simple terms, a plan to rebuild everything from nothing and to come back stronger than anyone thought possible. The first phase was survival. Earth still had its own sun, its own planets, its own asteroid belt, full of metals and minerals. Within 5 years, humanity had colonized Mars properly. Not the small research stations they had before, but real cities under domed skies, with farms and factories and families. Europa, the ice moon of Jupiter, became an ocean research hub. Titan, Saturn's largest moon, was turned into a fuel production center. The asteroid belt was carved apart by mining ships that ran day and night. pulling iron and nickel and rare metals out of floating rocks the size of mountains. The galaxy had given humanity everything through trade. Now humanity learned to give itself everything instead. And in doing so, it discovered something important. The technology the Accord had shared with them had been deliberately limited. The engines were slow, on purpose. The energy systems were inefficient by design. The elder species had been giving younger civilizations just enough to survive, but never enough to compete. Humanity's scientists looked at the alien technology they still had in their laboratories and began to take it apart, not to copy it, but to understand it. And then they built something better. In the 12th year of exile, a ship called the Mugunghwa left Earth's orbit and jumped to faster-than-light speed using an engine that no alien had ever seen before. It was not based on the Accord's designs. It was built from the ground up, using human mathematics, human engineering, and human stubbornness. And it was fast, 3 times faster than anything the Accord had ever produced. The pilot, a Korean woman named Captain Se-Yun Park, flew the ship to the edge of the quarantine zone and back in 4 hours, a journey that should have taken 6 days. She landed, climbed out of the cockpit, and said 2 words to the waiting engineers. "It works." Earth did not celebrate publicly. There were no announcements, no broadcasts. Everything was kept silent, because the second phase of Directive Zero was not about building ships. It was about building ears. In the 18th year, humanity began placing relay stations in deep space, far outside the quarantine zone, hidden in the electromagnetic noise of distant nebulae and dead stars. Each station was small, no bigger than a car, and completely passive. It did not send signals, it only listened. And what it heard was everything. The Prometheus network picked up Accord communications, military transmissions, trade negotiations, private diplomatic channels. Humanity could not speak to the galaxy, but it could hear every word the galaxy said. And what it heard told a very interesting story. The Accord was not as strong as it appeared. The elder species were constantly fighting among themselves for influence. The Torvan hegemony was expanding aggressively, absorbing smaller species into its territory by force, while the rest of the Accord looked the other way. The Keth Collective's technology monopoly was crumbling as younger species began to reverse engineer the tools they had been renting for centuries. And beneath it all, a deep current of resentment flowed through the younger civilizations, resentment that the exile of Earth had only made stronger. In the 25th year, the first alien message arrived at a Prometheus relay. It was short, encrypted, and desperate. It came from the Velathari, a species of tall, thin beings with silver skin and 6 eyes, who lived on a beautiful ocean world at the edge of Torvan space. They had been one of the 418 species that voted against Earth's exile. The message said, "We remember you. We have not forgotten. Are you still there?" Earth responded with a single word, "Yes." After that, the messages came faster. Dozens of species reached out through hidden channels. Some were members of the Accord who disagreed with the elder species, but were too afraid to speak openly. Others were subjugated peoples who had no voice in the conclave at all. They shared information, star charts, political intelligence, and in return, humanity shared something far more valuable: hope. By the 30th year of exile, Earth had become something the galaxy had never seen before. A single star system with technology that surpassed every major power in the Accord. A civilization that had been punished for its ideas and had used that punishment to become stronger than its punishers. And nobody in the halls of the Grand Conclave had any idea. The elder species had stopped watching Earth years ago. As far as they were concerned, the human problem had been solved. They had moved on to other things: new territories to claim, new species to control, new power to gather. The quarantine beacons still hummed around Sol, and the galaxy had forgotten what was behind them. Then, on a quiet day in the 30th year, a signal broke through the quarantine zone. It was not encrypted. It was not hidden. It was a raw, open distress call, screaming on every frequency. The Velithari were dying. The Torvan hegemony had finally turned its hunger toward the Velithari homeworld. A fleet of 800 warships had surrounded the planet. Cities were burning. Orbital stations were crumbling. The Velithari had sent pleas to the Galactic Accord. But the Accord had done what the Accord always did when the Torvan attacked someone. It held meetings, it debated, it sent strongly worded statements of concern. It did nothing. The Velithari's final message was not sent to the Accord. It was sent to the Prometheus Network. It said, "Please, if anyone can hear us, we are out of time." In a command center buried deep inside the mountains of Switzerland, Admiral Yuki Tanaka, a small woman with gray hair and steady hands, listened to the message 3 times. She looked at the tactical display showing the Torvan fleet. She looked at the readiness report for Earth's own fleet. 200 warships, each one carrying technology the galaxy had never imagined. She turned to her officers and said, "Prep the fleet. We leave in 6 hours." No one in the room asked if they were sure. No one asked for permission. No one mentioned that they were still exiled, that they had no legal right to leave the quarantine zone, that the entire galaxy might turn against them. They simply began to move. Because that was what humanity did. When someone screamed for help, humanity answered. It had always been this way. It would always be this way. The galaxy was about to remember why they had been afraid of humans in the first place. And this time, they would be right to be afraid. The Torvan fleet had surrounded the Velithari homeworld like a fist closing around a beating heart. 800 warships hung in orbit above the blue-green ocean planet, their weapons pointed downward, their shields bright with energy. On the surface below, cities that had stood for 10,000 years were burning. The Velithari people, gentle, tall beings who had spent their civilization studying the oceans and the stars, were huddled in underground shelters, listening to the sound of their world being torn apart. Torvan Commander Grelix stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the destruction with satisfaction. The Velithari had no real military. Their ships were research vessels, not warships. This was not a battle. It was a harvest. The Torvan would absorb the Velithari, take their world, take their resources, and add another name to the long list of species that existed only to serve the hegemony. Everyone in the Accord knew the Torvan did this, and no one stopped them. That was how the galaxy worked. The strong took. The weak were taken. It had been this way for 1,000,000 years. Then his sensor officer made a sound that Grelix had never heard before, a sound of pure confusion. "Commander," the officer said, "I am detecting a fleet dropping out of faster-than-light travel. 200 vessels. They arrived at the edge of the system 4 seconds ago." 4 seconds, Grelix turned sharply. No fleet could decelerate that quickly. Accord technology required at least 30 minutes of approach before a ship could safely leave FTL. "That is impossible. Identify them." The sensor officer stared at the readings for a long time. Then he looked up at his commander with something that might have been fear. "They are human." Silence fell across the bridge. Every officer stopped moving. The word sat in the air, like a bomb that had not yet exploded. "That is impossible," Grelix said again. "Humans are quarantined. They do not have ships capable of reaching this system. They do not have— Commander, they are hailing us. Open channel, all frequencies." Grelix's jaw tightened. "They are bluffing. 200 ships against 800? Put them on screen." The main display flickered, and a human face appeared. A woman, small, older, with gray hair pulled back tight, and dark eyes that held no fear at all. She wore a simple uniform, with no decorations, except a single patch on her shoulder, a blue circle with a white star. "This is Admiral Yuki Tanaka, of the United Earth Defense Fleet," she said. Her voice was calm and clear, like someone reading the weather. "I am addressing the Torvan hegemony forces, currently attacking the Velithari homeworld." Grelix leaned forward. "You are exiled. You have no legal right to be here. You are in violation of the quarantine order placed by the Galactic Accord. Withdraw immediately, or you will be destroyed." Tanaka did not blink. "We did not come to rejoin your accord," she said. "We do not need your permission. We are here because someone asked for help. And you," she paused, and for the first time, something hard entered her voice. "And everyone else in this galaxy refused to give it." She straightened in her chair. "So let me be clear about why we are here. And I want everyone listening to understand this, because I am broadcasting on every frequency in this system, and I know the Accord's relay network will carry these words to every corner of the galaxy." She took a breath. "These are humanity's rules. Rule 1. We protect those who cannot protect themselves. Rule 2. We do not start wars, but we finish them. Rule 3. We forgive those who wrong us, once." She held up one finger. "This is your once. Withdraw your fleet from Velithari space. Power down your weapons. Leave these people alone, and we will let you go home. Every ship, every crew member, alive and unharmed." Grelix stared at the screen. Then he laughed. It was a deep rumbling sound that echoed across his bridge. "You bring 200 ships against 800, and you make demands? You are either brave or stupid, human. I have destroyed civilizations older than yours before breakfast." "I know," Tanaka said quietly. "That is exactly why we are here." She cut the transmission. Grelix gave the order to attack. 800 Torvan warships turned their weapons toward the human fleet, and the largest military engagement in a century began. It lasted 11 minutes. The human ships moved in ways that should not have been physically possible. They accelerated and turned and stopped with a speed that made the Torvan vessels look like they were swimming through mud. Their weapons were not the standard energy beams or kinetic projectors the galaxy had used for millennia. They fired something new, targeted pulses that passed through shields like they were not there, and struck with surgical precision at engines, weapon systems, and communication arrays. One by one, the Torvan warships went dark. Not destroyed, not burning, just silent. Their engines dead, their weapons cold, their crews alive and staring at blank screens in confusion. The human fleet did not take a single hit, not because the Torvan did not try. They fired everything they had: missiles, energy weapons, kinetic rounds. The human ships simply were not where the weapons expected them to be. They moved like water around stones, always one step ahead, always just out of reach. In 11 minutes, 800 Torvan warships were floating dead in space. Not one Torvan soldier was killed. Not one hull was breached. Every life support system was deliberately left running. Every crew was alive, healthy, and completely helpless. Admiral Tanaka reopened the communication channel. Commander Grelix's face appeared on screen. He was no longer laughing. The expression on his face was something ancient and primal, the look of a predator that had just discovered it was prey. "Your fleet is disabled," Tanaka said in the same calm weather report voice. "Your crews are unharmed. Life support is functional on all vessels. Rescue and repair ships will be able to reach you within standard travel time." She leaned forward slightly. "That was Rule 3, Commander. Your one forgiveness. Go home, tell your hegemony what happened here today. Tell them what our ships can do. Tell them we chose not to kill. And tell them that if they come back, for the Velithari or for anyone else, we will not choose that again." Grelix said nothing. There was nothing to say. The transmission ended. The human fleet remained in orbit around the Velithari homeworld for 6 hours, long enough to confirm that no second Torvan force was coming. During those 6 hours, human medical ships descended to the surface and began treating wounded Velithari civilians. Human engineers helped stabilize damaged structures. Human soldiers carried children out of collapsed shelters with gentle hands. The Velithari Prime Minister, a tall woman with silver skin and 6 eyes that were wet with tears, stood before Admiral Tanaka in the ruins of her capital city and tried to find words. "Why?" she asked. "We are nothing to you. We are a small species on a small world. Why did you come?" Tanaka looked at the burning city. She looked at the Velithari children being wrapped in thermal blankets by human medics. She looked at the sky, where the disabled Torvan fleet drifted silently among the stars. "Because you asked," she said. "That is all the reason we have ever needed." The recordings of the Battle of Velithari spread across the galaxy within hours. Every species with access to a communication relay watched the footage. They watched 200 human ships dismantle 800 Torvan warships without killing a single being. They watched the Admiral deliver humanity's 3 rules. They watched human soldiers carrying alien children through rubble. The Grand Conclave called an emergency session. The elder species screamed and argued and demanded action. The younger species sat in silence, watching the footage again and again, and in their eyes there was something the elder species had spent 600,000 years trying to prevent. The galaxy did not break all at once. It cracked slowly, the way ice cracks on a river when spring comes. Quiet at first, then louder, then all at once in a sound like thunder. It started with the words. Humanity's 3 rules were never meant to be a political document. They were a soldier's promise, spoken by an admiral in the middle of a battle, broadcast on an open channel because she wanted the enemy to hear. But the galaxy took those words and turned them into something much bigger. Within days of the Battle of Velithari, the rules were being repeated on 1,000 worlds, translated into languages that had no human alphabet, carved into walls, projected onto buildings, whispered in markets, and shouted in assembly halls. They spread the way all dangerous ideas spread, not because anyone forced them to, but because they were true, and beings who had been kept silent for centuries recognized truth when they heard it. The younger species moved first. On the industrial world of Cathan, where the local population had been mining ore for the Keth Collective for 800 years without ever being allowed to build their own ships, workers stopped working. They simply put down their tools and refused. When the Keth demanded an explanation, the workers said 4 words that made the Collective's representatives go very still. "We protect each other." On the border worlds of the Torvan hegemony, 3 species that had been absorbed centuries ago formed a mutual defense agreement. They had no warships, no advanced technology, no military training. But they had numbers, and they had each other. They called their agreement the First Pact, and its opening line read, "No species shall stand alone." The Galactic Accord held emergency session after emergency session, but the elder species could not agree on what to do. The Dren wanted to send peacekeeping forces to restore order. The Keth wanted to impose economic sanctions on any species that referenced human ideology. The Torvan wanted to do what the Torvan always wanted to do. They wanted war. And so the Torvan chose war. 3,000 warships. It was the largest fleet the hegemony had ever assembled, nearly 4 times the size of the force that had attacked the Velithari. Every ship was armed with the most powerful weapons the Torvan possessed. Every crew was made up of experienced soldiers who had spent their lives conquering other species. Commander Grelix, who had been humiliated at Velithari, was given command and told to restore the hegemony's honor. The fleet crossed the quarantine boundary and entered the Sol system on a Tuesday morning, Earth time. They expected to find a civilization still recovering from exile. a single planet with limited defenses, an easy target that would send a message to the entire galaxy, that the Torvan were still the strongest, that human ideas were a disease that could be cured with enough firepower. What they found instead was something that made Commander Grelix's blood run cold. Earth's defense network filled the entire system. Thousands of automated platforms hung in orbit around every planet, every moon, every significant asteroid. A web of energy barriers connected them like the threads of a spider's web, each one humming with power that the Torvan sensors could not even properly measure. And behind the defense network, moving in perfect formation, was Earth's home fleet. 500 warships, each one larger and more advanced than the vessels that had fought at Velithari. Grelix opened a channel. "This is Commander Grelix of the Torvan Hegemony. We are here to—" The response came instantly. Not from a person, from an automated system, calm and polite, like a recorded message. "Welcome to the Sol system. You have entered restricted space with weapons armed. You have 11 minutes to power down your weapons and reverse course. This is not a negotiation." Grelix gave the order to attack. 11 minutes later, 3,000 Torvan warships were floating dead in space. Every system disabled, every crew alive, every life support system still running. The defense network had not even used its full capability. Later analysis by Torvan engineers would reveal that Earth systems had operated at roughly 12% power. This time the message that accompanied the disabled fleet was different. Admiral Tanaka's face appeared on every Torvan screen, and her voice was harder than it had been at Velithari. "That was not Rule 3, she said. "You already used your forgiveness. That was Rule 2. We did not start this, we finished it. There will not be a third lesson. Take your ships, go home, and understand that the next time a Torvan fleet fires a weapon at anyone, human or otherwise, we will not be so careful about keeping everyone alive." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer but no less firm. "We do not want to be your enemy, but we will be, if that is what you choose. Choose wisely." The Torvan fleet limped home. Commander Grelix was removed from command and never seen in public again. The hegemony, for the first time in its long and bloody history, went quiet. The political earthquake that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had experienced. The 418 species that had voted against Earth's exile, many of whom had spent 30 years secretly communicating with humanity through the Prometheus network, announced their formal withdrawal from the Galactic Accord. They called themselves the Free People's Coalition, and they invited Earth to join as a founding member. Earth accepted, with one condition that shocked everyone. Humanity refused to lead. Ambassador Osei, now older and grayer but still possessed of the same calm eyes, addressed the coalition's first assembly. "We will not sit at the head of this table," he said. "We will not hold a permanent council seat. We will not command your fleets or direct your economies. This coalition exists because every species here believes that no one should have power over another. If we take the highest seat, we become exactly what we fought against." The coalition agreed. Every species had equal standing. Every voice carried equal weight. It was messy and slow and sometimes frustrating, but it was fair, and that mattered more. Then Earth did something that broke the Galactic Accord's back entirely. Humanity released its technology, all of it, every engine design, every medical advancement, every agricultural technique, every piece of scientific knowledge that Earth had developed during 30 years of exile. All of it was made freely available to every member of the coalition. No cost, no contracts, no conditions. The effect was immediate and devastating. Not to the coalition, but to the Accord. The Keth Collective's entire economy was built on controlling technology. Species paid enormous prices to rent Keth engines, Keth medical equipment, Keth communication systems. Suddenly, those same species could get better technology from the coalition for free. The Keth's trade networks collapsed within 2 years. Their political influence followed shortly after. Species began leaving the Accord not in a trickle, but in a flood. Every month, another civilization announced its withdrawal. Some joined the coalition, others simply declared independence. The Accord, which had stood for 600,000 years as the unchallengeable authority of the galaxy, was shrinking like a puddle in the sun. Ambassador Osei returned to the Grand Conclave 1 year after the formation of the coalition. He did not come as a petitioner or a diplomat. He came as an observer, invited by the younger species who were still trapped within the Accord's structure. He sat in the same small chair near the back of the chamber and watched. The elder species argued with each other. The Dren blamed the Keth. The Keth blamed the Torvan. The Torvan blamed everyone. They shouted and accused and pointed fingers, and through it all, Osei sat quietly and said nothing. After the session ended, a private message arrived at his personal communicator. It was from High Arbiter Salenthi of the Dren, the oldest living member of the oldest living species in the Accord, the being who had overseen Earth's exile 35 years ago. The message contained one line. "What do you want?" Osei read it, thought for a moment, and typed his response. "We told you 35 years ago. You just were not listening." He closed the communicator, stood up, and walked out of the chamber. Behind him, the Galactic Accord continued to argue. It did not notice him leave. It had never been very good at noticing the things that mattered. The Grand Conclave had never been this quiet. For 600,000 years, the chamber had been filled with noise. The hum of translators, the rumble of alien voices, the clicking and buzzing and singing of thousands of species speaking in thousands of languages. It had always been a place of power, of argument, of authority so old that most species could not remember a time before it existed. Now it felt like a hospital room. Only half the seats were filled. The other half belonged to species that had already left, gone to the Free People's Coalition, or simply gone, choosing independence over a system that had failed them. The empty seats were the loudest thing in the chamber. They said more than any speech ever could. High Arbiter Salenthi stood at the center of the great floor. The ancient Dren was the oldest being in the room, old enough to remember when the Accord had been young, when it had meant something, when it had been built not to control, but to connect. Those days were so far gone that even Salenthi sometimes wondered if they had ever been real. The request had been made formally, through proper channels, with all the correct diplomatic language. The Galactic Accord was inviting Earth to return. Not as a member, the Accord no longer had the pride to pretend this was a simple readmission. They were inviting humanity back as a reformer. They were asking to be fixed. It had taken the elder species 36 years to say these words. 36 years of watching their power crack and crumble. 36 years of pretending everything was fine while the galaxy rearranged itself around them. 36 years of learning, slowly and painfully, that the universe did not owe them obedience just because they had existed the longest. Ambassador Emeka Osei walked into the chamber the same way he had walked out of it 36 years ago, slowly, calmly, with his hands at his sides and his eyes steady. He was an old man now. His hair had gone white. His face was lined with decades of work and worry and patience. But his eyes were the same. Those calm, dark eyes that had looked at 4,000 species and told them they were making a mistake. He took his place at the center of the floor, the same spot where the Dren speaker had read the charges against Earth all those years ago. He looked up at the remaining representatives, some hostile, some curious, some afraid, many hopeful, and he did not smile. This was not a moment for smiling. This was a moment for truth. 36 years ago, he began, I stood in this chamber and listened to you tell me that my species was dangerous, that our ideas were a threat to order, that the galaxy would be safer without us. He paused and let the words echo. You were right about one thing. Our ideas are dangerous. They are dangerous because they cannot be contained. You can exile a species. You can surround their star with warning beacons. You can cut their trade routes and cancel their treaties and pretend they do not exist. But you cannot kill an idea. You never could. He reached into his coat and produced a single sheet of paper. Actual paper, thin and white, the kind humans had been writing on for thousands of years. He held it up so the chamber could see it. These are humanity's conditions for assisting in the reformation of the Galactic Accord. They are not demands. We are not demanding anything. We are offering to help, and these are the terms of that help. He read them slowly, clearly, in simple words that needed no translation. First, no species shall be subjugated, absorbed, or silenced by another. Any violation will be met with collective response from all members. The Torvan representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seat. Second, all technology shared within the Accord will be open and free. No species may use knowledge as a chain to bind another. The Keth representative made a sound like grinding metal. Third, any species may leave the Accord at any time, without punishment, without penalty, without consequence. The Accord exists to serve its members. If it fails to serve them, they have every right to walk away. Several younger species in the gallery nodded. The concept of elder species as a political rank is abolished. Age does not give authority. Wisdom is not measured in years. Every species in this chamber has equal standing, equal voice, and equal vote. Now the silence in the chamber was absolute. The elder species, the Dren, the Torvan, the Keth, and dozens of others who had held power for millennia, stared at the old human standing before them. This was the thing they had feared most. Not human weapons, not human ships. This, the idea that their age did not make them better. And fifth, Osei said, and here he folded the paper and put it back in his coat. Earth will not lead. We will hold no permanent seat of power. We will command no fleet, control no economy, and claim no authority over any other civilization. We will be equal members of this accord, and nothing more. A long silence followed. Then High Arbiter Salenthi stepped forward. The ancient Dren's body was frail with age, its white-bone limbs trembling slightly, but its voice was still strong. I must ask, Salenthi said, and there was genuine confusion in the old being's voice. Not anger, not pride, but real, honest confusion. You have the most powerful military in the galaxy. Your technology is beyond anything we have ever seen. You could take this accord by force. You could place yourself at the head of every table, in every chamber, on every world. Every species that has ever achieved what you have achieved has done exactly that. It is the way of things, the strong rule. Salenthi leaned forward. You could rule the galaxy. Why do you not? Osei looked at the High Arbiter for a long time. And then, for the first time in 36 years, he smiled. Because that is not who we are, he said. He stepped closer to the ancient Dren, close enough that his voice dropped low, but the chamber's systems carried every word to every ear. You exiled us because our ideas were dangerous, and you were right, they are. But not to the people who embrace them. Only to those who try to suppress them. Freedom is only dangerous to those who fear it. Fairness is only a threat to those who profit from unfairness. The right to say no is only terrifying to those who have never been told no before. He turned back to face the full chamber. We did not come back to rule you. We came back to show you that power does not have to mean control, that strength can mean protection instead of domination, that the measure of a civilization is not how long it has existed or how many worlds it controls, but what it chooses to do with the time and the power it has. He stopped. He had said everything he needed to say. There was nothing more. The vote was called. Species after species registered their decision. The numbers climbed on the great display at the front of the chamber. And when the final count was read, the result was something that had never happened in 600,000 years of galactic accord history. Unanimous. Every single species voted yes. Even the Torvan, even the Keth, even the Dren. The chamber erupted, not in the polite, restrained acknowledgement that usually followed accord votes, but in something raw and real. Species that had been enemies for centuries turned to each other and spoke. Delegates who had not exchanged a word in decades reached across the gaps between their seats. It was messy and loud and emotional, and it was the most alive the Grand Conclave had felt in a very long time. Ambassador Osei did not stay for the celebration. He gathered his things quietly, nodded to High Arbiter Salenthi, who nodded back with something that might have been respect, and walked toward the exit. Outside the chamber, the corridor was filled with representatives who had been watching the proceedings on screens. Dozens of species, hundreds of individuals, all standing in silence as the old human walked past. Some reached out to touch his arm as he passed. Others simply bowed their heads. Near the end of the corridor, a young Velithari diplomat stepped forward. She was barely old enough to remember the siege of her homeworld. She had been a child when human soldiers pulled her from the rubble and wrapped her in a blanket. She had grown up knowing that somewhere in the stars, there were beings who came when you called for help. She looked at the old ambassador with her 6 silver eyes, and she asked the question that everyone was thinking. What happens now? Osei stopped walking. He looked at the young woman, and then he looked past her through the great windows of the station, out at the stars. Millions of them, billions, each one a sun, each sun with worlds, each world with people who were waking up to the idea that the galaxy could be different, better, fairer, that the old ways were not the only ways. He thought about Earth, about the years of silence and building, about the factories and the laboratories, and the soldiers who had trained not to conquer, but to protect. About Director Mwangi, who had started all of this with Directive Zero, and who had not lived to see this day. About Admiral Tanaka, who had fired the first shots and had aimed every single one of them to save lives rather than take them. About every human being who had ever looked up at the night sky and believed that tomorrow could be better than today. He turned back to the young Velithari diplomat, and he smiled the same way he had smiled at High Arbiter Salenthi, warmly, honestly, like a man who had carried something heavy for a very long time and had finally been allowed to set it down. Now, he said, now we build something worth keeping. He walked on, and the stars watched, and for the first time in a very long time, the galaxy felt like it was facing the right direction.